Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Aliana Kernodle. A Tennessee law meant to curb school violence has reportedly been used again to penalize younger students, allegedly leading a 10-year-old to be expelled for an entire year after making a finger gun gesture. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, we've discussed this law a bit before on the podcast, but can you remind us of the details?
Yeah. So the law in Tennessee says that students are not allowed to. It's a zero tolerance policy for threats of mass violence, right? And so that's a statute on the books in Tennessee saying there's going to be no license for making these kinds of threats against public places, specifically in schools. And this does have a very sad beginning to it, an origin to it, and you can kind of see where this is coming from after the Covenant School shooting in Nashville, right, where a shooter came into the school and killed students and staff, and there was a wide outpouring of support for this kind of legislation, this law restricting that, and moving to that zero tolerance sort of threshold for mass threats. And that specifically is defined in the law as the threat of mass violence or actions that a reasonable person would conclude to lead to the serious bodily injury. So that's sort of like the legal definition that's listed in these lawsuits that we're kind of talking about later on by these two separate families. So that comes from that document there, that court document. So there's like a legal understanding of what this puts into law, and it's regarded to we're not going to take anything from students that is related to this, basically sending a warning message. That's kind of how legislators described it, as we're giving a warning that this is completely unacceptable. And so that's kind of the basis of the law.
And so what's this latest example of allegations of its misuse?
So ProPublica, they do independent. I think it's a nonprofit sort of thing, a newsroom there, and they do investigative pieces, and they essentially found that a 10-year-old in Tennessee was expelled for an entire year, a calendar year, because that student made a finger gun. So these are, I think, maybe it was toward a teacher, and so essentially, pointed the fingers in the shape of a gun. I think it made a sound like a machine gun, and so I think that those two actions combined, and it was in anger, right? This was something, but a 10-year-old kind of doing this, maybe plays video games, maybe has seen this kind of stuff depicted, and that was a way to sort of show aggression. In the situation, that was the response that this student had. Again, unnamed, a 10-year-old, a minor. So that's the reason for sort of the anonymity there. But his mom said, and again, it was not unnamed. That's the trouble with some of these small town schools, right? Is that if you go on and have your name, even your first name, and you're in such a small school district, then people will know who you are because there's only so many people. So I think that was kind of ProPublica is dancing around that a little bit in their reporting, but essentially said that the student made that sound, was suspended for a few days, and then the parent subsequently got a letter that said, we're kicking out your student for the entire calendar year, and basically cited the law saying that, there's a zero tolerance policy for these kinds of threats of, essentially mass violence, invoking that language, whether or not they said it. They said, this is whether they said the student was, saying mass violence, they're invoking the state law.
And what cases have come up before kind of questioning this law or questioning the ways it's been applied?
Yeah, so two separate families in May filed a lawsuit against the school district, the Williamson County Board of Education there in Tennessee, separately. So both families were targeting them, and as well as the governor of Tennessee, Bill Lee. And they basically said on separate occasions, two students from those families, both in the Williamson County School District, they were wrongfully arrested, incarcerated, and suspended because the district's interpretation of the Tennessee statute that required zero tolerance for threats of mass violence, right? So essentially, they laid out like this is what happened when our kids said these things, and they did make. In one case, one family alleged that a student was just talking about another student who was talking about a machine gun, an AK-47, and the student was apparently talking about how like he heard this kid talking about it, about how he shot some weapon over the weekend or over the summer. And he was kind of saying, I don't think that actually happened. Like, I'm doubtful that like the student said that. And this is according to the legal documents that were filed in this case. And like somebody heard him talking about that, and he was sent to juvenile detention. Entered into the criminal justice system as a minor, and I think was like strip searched and was like kept from his parents and in solitary confinement, and then eventually was placed on house arrest while they were like undergoing like these different procedures, and just being like immediately thrown into like the system. And the lawsuit claims that they were humiliated, deprived of access to their classes and curriculum, and made to suffer other indignities, right? And also in front of their friends, like they were removed and sent to juvenile detention essentially. And then the other family's student made a joke in like a group chat, I think it was on the school messaging system or something like that. It was at school, and then somebody found out about it, and she made just like a joke in poor taste about, we'll kill some group of people. And it was obviously a joke and not a good one, right? But like that's sort of the trouble here that the families are arguing, is that these are young people, right? These are kids in middle school or elementary school, and they're being, this law is being used to expel them or suspend them or send them to the juvenile detention.
Well, thank you, Brennan, for your insights on these stories. I'm sure we'll continue to follow any further developments in these cases going forward. Listeners can keep up with these stories and more at chalkboardnews.com.